Warning, the Renegade Recruiter is not for the soft, timid, or faint-hearted. If you need permission or seek approval from your mother, spouse, mates in the pub, or anyone else for that matter, this really isn't for you. If any of what you've heard puts you off in the slightest, I advise you not to listen any further. You've been warned. Prepare yourself for the no bullshit, zero fluff. Quick, dirty, and uncensored secrets for any serious recruitment, staffing, and search business owner who wants to earn more money with less work and fewer headaches, without having to kiss ass or bend over backwards to please anyone. He's a relentless and fearless renegade who will stop at nothing to reveal the harsh, unforgiving, and brutal truth about what it really takes to succeed in this business. He's a guy people love to hate and hate to love. It's your host, Terry Edwards. The Renegade Recruiter is unleashed.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Terry Edwards, Renegade Recruiter, and welcome to another episode of Renegade Recruiter Unleashed. And of course, we're joined by our co-host, Drew. Drew, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, thank you, Terry. How are you?
Absolutely fantastic. And today our guest is Andy Paul from andypaul.com. So, Paul, thank you very much for joining us. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
It's a real pleasure. We're looking forward to this one. Just give us an overview, Paul, of how do you describe what you do and what your offering is, please, Paul?
Sure. So, as you said, andypaul.com, or actually my website is zerotimeselling.com as well, either one. And I do a number of things. One is I host a 6-day-a-week sales podcast that is 6 days a week with leading sales experts, sales thought leaders, marketing experts, management experts. It's a half-hour interview-based show, so people can find that. The name of it's called Accelerate with Andy Paul. Find it on iTunes and Stitcher. And then I do a lot of coaching with CEOs of small companies, startups, and do workshops with companies as well, sort of all around the topic of how do they make their selling more efficient.
Excellent subject. One of my favourite subjects, I've got to say, Andy. I'm really looking forward to this. And out of interest, Andy, how do you get into this?
Well, I had a long career previously in sales, primarily in technology business. The year 2000, I started my own company to start helping smaller businesses sort of apply some of the lessons that I had learned throughout my career, which was really focused on, as I said, I worked for startups, I worked for small companies selling really large, complex systems. And so helping small companies understand how to compete against bigger companies and win large orders was what I focused on initially.
Brilliant. Great stuff. And Andy, can you tell us something about you that most people don't know? So an interesting or funny story?
Oh my gosh. Where would I start on that? I don't know. I mean, just personally, I split my time between New York and California, so I'm back and forth quite a bit. Have offices in both locations. I'm not sure how compelling and interesting that is, but keeps me on the go quite a bit. Yeah. I don't know. One of my books, Amp Up Your Sales, is on Amazon's rank of the 20 highest rated sales books of all time.
Awesome.
Excellent.
And that's hopefully that's a fun fact to know and tell.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Let me add something as well. We're talking offline, so to speak, and you're also a soccer fan as well, aren't you, Andy?
I am, yes. Yeah. I got the bug when I finished. My parents moved overseas to Tokyo in business when I was just at the end of my high school, secondary education, and learned how to start playing there. This was a long time ago, before it was really popular among school-age kids in the United States, and then played a little bit in college and just been a big fan ever since.
Right, and for your sins, not many people want to know this, but I'll share it anyway. You're a Liverpool fan. You support Liverpool.
I do, yes.
Never mind.
Never mind. You say as a Man U fan, yes.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, I'm surprised we're even talking to you, actually, Andy. But there we go. Somebody tried to, they asked me, why a Liverpool fan? And I was trying to remember what it was so many years ago about Liverpool, and I just remember when they started broadcasting EPL games to the U.S. really actively, and this was, I think, even before it's called the Premier League, following Liverpool and watching Steve McManaman. And I was a huge Steve McManaman fan. And that's sort of one of my earlier memories of Liverpool sort of caught me.
Excellent. Fantastic. So, you've written books, you follow soccer. Clearly you don't know much about it because you support Liverpool.
Yeah.
So, sorry, look, listen, Andy, seriously, mate, you're going to get that from a Man United fan. That's
I know.
Yeah. But in terms of, if I met you somewhere and we got talking and so on, and I said, what is it you bring to a business? If I'm a small business owner, what is it you could do for a small business owner? How would you describe that?
The thing that is probably the biggest problem for small businesses when it comes to selling their products or services is any form of consistency in how they approach it. And that's really what I work with CEOs on. It's what I work with the sales teams on, and their sales leaders, is how do they develop a process that they can apply consistently in order to win business. And a lot of that starts with just basic behaviors that the sales reps, the sales professionals have to follow. And part of the problem we have with sales training in general these days is, people swoop into a company, they'll take them off site for 2 days, they'll teach them all these sales skills, if you will. But what they don't touch are these basic sales behaviors that form the foundation of any salesperson's success, which is, are they, one of my favorites, are they responsive to what I call absolute responsiveness? Do they have a focus on being about the prospect or the customer first, right? Asking the right questions instead of leading with a sales pitch. They pay attention to detail. I've got a list of 20 or 30 of these, what I call sales habits that people need to develop before you can really focus on enhancing and improving your skills, right? You need to show that you're going to have the basic sales behavior, sales habits that you need before you can really fine-tune them and make them much more effective. So that's what I work with clients on, is how do we develop what are these baseline of sales habits or sales behaviors, and how do we get them inculcated into the team and practiced? How do they change their existing behaviors to these newer behaviors? And then on top of that, how do we build the skills on top of that?
And just going onto the habits, Andy, is this something that anyone can develop? Because you hear a lot of talk about, are great salespeople born or made? What's your take on that?
Definitely made. I'm sort of a classic introvert in many respects, and so I don't think I would have ever considered myself to be a prototypical sales type, but certainly as in the generation that I came of age in, and I think that's sort of true in general. You don't have to have this stereotypical outgoing, glad-handing personality to succeed at sales, because what the customer wants from you is they want you to be able to help them solve a problem.
Yeah. And
that doesn't require a certain personality type. It just requires a certain set of behaviors and customer orientation to be able to do that.
And there is an argument as well, isn't there, Andy, that in fact there is an argument that introverts probably make better salespeople because they are more likely to listen than an extrovert.
Yeah, there's some people that believe that. There's been some books written about it in the last couple of years saying that introverts tend to be more naturally analytical as opposed to extrovert and outgoing, and I don't know if one personality type has an advantage over the other. I think your ability to sort of show that you can have these basic good sales behaviors really is most important, and it doesn't really matter. Again, you're introvert, extrovert. If you could be an introvert, you're unlikely to do this, but an introvert could go in and meet a prospect for the first time and commit sort of the cardinal sin of leading off by talking about the product and service they're selling rather than asking questions of the prospect.
Yeah.
Either personality type could fall victim to that. But
yeah, good point.
But back to the original question, I absolutely believe salespeople are made, and I spent a good chunk of my career before starting my own company, and even afterwards with some clients, where we've completely recast their sales team and found that maybe they were selling a technical product and their regular salespeople just weren't
up to speed in terms of the product and service and the value that the product brings to the customer and how the customers actually use it. So we'd bring in technical people from within the company, engineers, software engineers, hardware engineers, to become salespeople. And it became controversial in some sectors of these client companies because people thought, well, gosh, sales, engineers, they don't have the personality to be they're not people, they don't have the personality to be a sales rep. They were all, for the most part, very successful at what they did because they understood.
Yeah. What, in your opinion, is the sort of the perception of the typical salesperson, and is that a good thing?
Well, I think it's still, in general, it still pretty much sticks to the old stereotypes, which is, salesperson is all about themselves, not about the customer. And I see that changing bit by bit. I mean, if you just look at sales literature over the last decade, if nothing else, or even a decade and a half, the tenor has really changed, right? All the training has changed. It's less about mastering your pitch and more about asking the right questions, doing the right discovery with the prospect, working with them collaboratively to help them understand the problem they're trying to solve, and maybe give them help them see that perhaps there's even a better way to get it done.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that, I would say that even though the literature's gone that way and the training's gone that way, unfortunately probably 3/4 of salespeople still are trying to adjust to that. And I think part of that's just human nature. People get nervous, they're in a new situation, they're calling on a new potential prospect. They operate sort of instinctually, and they want to say something, right? They hate the silence, so they're going to say something rather than ask a question to get the other person talking.
Yeah. Andy, you mentioned quite a lot. There's different habits and behaviours that you need to, adapt if you want to be an effective salesperson. Can you sort of give us an overview of what some of those habits and behaviours are? I mean, you've mentioned there sort of the ability to ask the right questions, but is there anything else that if someone's listening to this right now and they either are the salesperson in the business or they have a team of salespeople beneath them who they want to train, what habits and behaviours do we need to look at?
Well, I mean, let's take something right at the very beginning of a sales process. Science is pretty well concluded that most decisions people make, not just in business but in our personal lives, are really driven initially by emotions. So the expression is we make emotional decisions for logical reasons. Meaning we sort of make that emotional decision, then we backfill the rationalizations for why we did it. So knowing that emotions drive a lot of the purchase decision, is you need to structure your sales process and your initial sales interactions in such a way that you are aligning with that emotional criteria of the customer. So creating positive first impressions is really an incredibly key one. Well, how do you create a positive first impression and create these lasting perceptions in the mind of the prospect that you're who they want to do business with? Well, we talked about responsiveness being one before. Somebody sends you an inquiry. How quickly do you follow that inquiry up? There's studies showing that at least in the U.S., in the business-to-business world, and I'm no reason to think it's any different in the UK or Europe, is that almost 70% of inbound sales leads are not adequately followed up. In some cases, not followed up at all. And when they are, it takes on average about 48 hours. Well, the science is also pretty clear that the faster you follow up and the more completely you follow up, you dramatically raise your chances of getting the order ultimately at the end of the day. Well, this is responsiveness is just a simple behavior that we could all master. I mean, doesn't require any input or guidance or tools from our company to be responsive. We just have to send an email or pick up the phone and call somebody. So in my first book, I talk an example about a client I had that CEO is a pretty successful serial entrepreneur. It was like his third or fourth company he had started. But this one was proving problematic. He was generating a lot of inbound leads, but things just weren't happening the way he thought they should. And when I came in and analyzed it, it was really evident very clearly that they just weren't following their leads up effectively. And so we changed the process so that they went from maybe following up 60% of their leads within 4 days to following up 100% of their leads within 24 hours.
Awesome.
Initially. And that change took like 5 minutes to make. And the big change was like, we had all the leads distributed through their CRM system, and the big change was I pointed to the CEO and I said, look, at 4:30 every day, you're going to log into Salesforce and make sure all these leads have been followed up. And instantly, surprisingly, they all complied with it, right? Because if they knew the CEO was checking, it happened. And so we got that process for that client down to a point where every lead that they got, they followed up within 30 minutes. And we upgraded their sales team so the people doing the follow-up were competent about the product and service they were selling. They could help the customers go through their discovery on that first call. Well, gosh, within the space of a couple of years, or less than 3 years, they doubled the size of the company.
Wow.
And had a very successful sale just through how they improved their lead follow-up. So that's responsiveness. And that's just a critical one. And again...
Sorry, Andy, carry on,
Well, I was just going to say, as a salesperson, that's completely within your control, because you prioritize how you spend your time. So, and once you start doing this, what they saw with this team, this particular team, this example, is they sort of became addicted to becoming responsive. And they wanted to become even more responsive because they saw the impact it had on their prospects. So it's one of the things where you can change your behavior slightly and it has this huge upside. So, part of that, the other behaviors they were doing at the same time is they're asking great questions when they got on the phone with the client. They weren't defaulting into giving their pitch. Instead of giving their pitch, they would ask questions and listen. We also train them to, take their filters off when they listened. So instead of thinking that every client is similar to some other client, if you get that, then you're not listening to the customer's answers anymore, because you're thinking, oh, they're just like this other company. This is how I'll answer that question. Is train them how to just be present, how to just be focused, how to just listen, and try to, block out the biases that they might have. And so, there's several behaviors that are incorporated into that, just that responses. The other thing was, we're really focused on is that every time that they had to go out, and I do this with anybody I work with, this is one of the key tenets of behaviors. Every time you interact with a prospect, you have to give them something of value that helps them move at least one step closer to making a decision. Every sales touch. There's no such thing as a wasted sales touch anymore. You can't afford the time. Your clients can't afford the time. So you think about all these random check-in calls that salespeople like to make when they haven't heard from a customer in 2 weeks. That's just wasting their time. So you have to understand, from a behavioral standpoint, that there's this bargain that's going on. It's the customer gives you some of their time, and what are you giving them in return? It doesn't matter whether they're reading an email, they're listening to a voicemail, or they're talking to you on the phone, or in a video conference, or whatever it is. They're investing time in you. There has to be value to be exchanged in return. Otherwise, you're going to stop getting their time.
Yeah.
So, Andy, how do we ensure that every time we communicate with a prospect or we follow up with a lead that it is of value to them? How do we ensure that happens?
Well, because you have to ask yourself. It has to be deliberate. So that's the other thing. You can't be on autopilot, as a lot of salespeople want to be, right? You can't be on autopilot. You have to be thoughtful and deliberate and take just a minute and say, okay, well, what does the customer need from me today, right now, in order to move one step closer to making a decision? And as a sales rep, you should know that. What do they need from me today in order to move one step closer to making a decision? And if you can't answer that question, well, then why are you contacting them?
Can you give us some examples of where a salesperson has used this and seen some sort of really good results? So just give us an idea of what sort of things that you can do to provide value to your prospects. Well,
there's really simple things. One is you have to be able to answer that question, right? So that question may be contextual based on where they are in their buying process. But just to give you an example is because a lot of times let's use this check-in call idea, because this is one that's pervasive throughout sales. And I'll ask when I go speak in front of a group, I'll say, raise your hand if you've ever made a check-in call, and maybe half the people raise their hands, and I say, well, okay, now we know that 50% of you are liars because we've all made these calls. And so instead of doing that, is maybe what we coach people to do is when you get a new prospect, set up some Google alerts about that prospect. Or if you have another system, some lead management systems that enable you to set alerts for certain trigger events that might be happening, or you do the same through with LinkedIn, you can do. So, but give yourself the ability to get, let's say, these Google alerts. Is every day Google will send you emails based on the keywords you put into the alerts for your prospect. It could be their company name, technology they use, or the industry they're in, whatever that is. And then every day you're going to get the sample of articles that you can choose from. So maybe you find something that's relevant to what the solution you're trying to help them procure. And so you send an email to your contact. So instead of making that check-in call, you send an email and say, hey, Mr. Prospect, I was thinking of you this morning when I read this article about how companies like yours using technology like ours, let's just say something like that. There are 2 key points in here I think that we really need to discuss. Are you free Monday at 9 o'clock? Well, that's really different than saying, hey, Mr. Prospect, been 2 weeks since we last talked. Hey, what's new?
Yeah.
That's fantastic, that is, Andy, yeah. And so simple to do.
Yeah.
It is. And like I said, there's an increasing number of tools that enable you to do that. I mean, I know some guy that, he every time there's a job title change of somebody in his LinkedIn connections, he gets an alert, and then he emails them, because his theory is that, and there's some literature that sort of supports this, that at a C-level position, if somebody changes jobs, that they're more likely to buy and invest in something that will help them do a better job within their first year on that new assignment.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So they use that as what we call trigger events, as an alert for a trigger event to go out and contact that person.
You're listening to the Renegade Recruiter Unleashed podcast. For show notes, additional resources, and podcast updates, head over to www.therenegaderecruiter.com.
Fascinating. Yeah. And there's some real gems here already. It's interesting. One of the challenges, what we do, Andy, just to let you know, is we share with our business, with our clients how to generate leads. And one of the frustrations we actually have is, and you really touched on this here, is that we can show most clients how to generate 20, 30, 40 leads a month, every single month. And our biggest frustration is, as you rightly said, they do not follow up on most of those leads. And what they tend to do is get the really hot leads, and they kind of follow up on those, they work on those, and they ignore, in some cases, 70% of the other leads, and never ever follow them up. And it's really interesting to hear you say that, because it's kind of reinforces what we encounter on a regular basis.
Well, how do they know which ones are the hot leads?
Well, what happens is they follow up on the leads, and as soon as they get something that bites, they work on that rather than thinking, right, this one's bitten, we've got the other warm leads here, let's follow up on those as well. And they tend to just concentrate on that person that's already said, yeah, I'm glad you called, hey, can you do this for me, or whatever.
Yeah, as opposed to doing any sort of research and finding out which ones are actually the ones that may have the bigger opportunity or the better opportunity. Yeah, it really requires, there's a certain amount of push-pull on this. Some companies do it differently. Some, and it probably depends on the volume of leads you're generating. But for smaller and mid-sized companies, they rarely are generating so many leads that they can't follow them all up. And so the question really then becomes your criteria for what's lead worth following up. If has somebody just downloaded signed up to be on your mailing list, or downloaded a white paper on your website, or is there some sort of score you're assigning to them?
Yeah.
You sort of have to work through that. But a lot of smaller companies, it should be everybody. Anyone that's raised their hand, that's gone to your website, and certainly as a minimum, what I tell companies is, if they've downloaded a white paper, look at the context. But if they've sent in an inquiry saying that they want to talk to somebody, then you absolutely have to follow 100% of them immediately.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And the other thing, you kind of remind me of something that I was always told in selling, that selling's not telling. There is this myth that it is about telling, but as you said, it's not about the pitch. It is about listening.
Yeah. I mean, I have a little formulary, I tell people, I call it the ask, don't tell, which is that anytime you're tempted to say something, ask a question instead. And think about that from a habit standpoint when you're dealing with a prospect is, every time you think like you got to say how great your product is, ask them a question instead. And even at a basic level, if you think, gosh, there's really something about our product that we think is really valuable, a feature that we do, that we have, that if implemented correctly is going to generate a ton of value, then frame that as a question instead of saying it as a
a statement of fact.
Yeah.
Would this be of value to you if you could be, or would it be valuable to you if you were able to get, this type of demonstrated ROI based on, this type of, yeah. I mean, it's suddenly you're asking people to give an opinion on something, and then you can start drilling down on that once they give a response. Ask them to go a little bit deeper. Another sales habit is just how do you ask the right second question? Because it's not the first question as much as it's the second question. And the second question is the easiest one of all. Is you ask the right question, somebody gives you some information, is pause for a second and say, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Tell me more. Or there's another author who's written a book who calls it the awe question. His version is, interesting. Now, and what else? But, both those work at the same thing. It's like, yeah, well, tell me more. Go deeper in that. And they go deeper. Well, I guarantee most of your competitors haven't asked that follow-up question. They're on to the next questions on their script.
Yeah.
So go off script.
Can you, and just, again, for anyone who's completely new to this, just explain the reason why we want them to go deeper, why you want to find out that additional information. What do we do with that information that we get once they answer that second question?
Well, it gives you the ability to really find out what it is that's important to them when they're making their decision.
Yeah.
Because, there's always layers to that. And my conviction and my experience has shown me is if you can be the one that finds out what that one thing is that's really driving their decision, then your odds of winning go up pretty substantially, because then you can start focusing on that. And example, years ago I had a team, we were selling this large opportunity in Malaysia, and we had multiple companies contending for it, and at the end, after they'd spent like 6 months talking to all these vendors, then the customer is going to put out an RFP. And so they put out a tender RFP, and they had this huge compliance matrix in the back of it that ran for 10 or more pages. It was hundreds of items that you had to check that you're compliant with. And it struck me, I said, after we spent all this time talking to this customer, buried in here somewhere is the real reason they're going to buy. One of these lights could be one of these items, these 100, 200 items in this matrix. It's going to be one of them. We need to find out which one it is. And we did, and we won. But that's really what you have to do is, not everything is equally as important. You have to find out the one thing that's most important.
Awesome.
Brilliant. Great stuff here, Andy. Great stuff. And your business, Zero Time Selling, how long has it been around now, Andy?
6 years.
6
Actually,
years.
in the current form, 6 years. It's been 16 years actually altogether. But so I sort of changed my business about 2011, early part of 2012, where I after I published my first book, Zero Time Selling, then nature of my business changed. So I went from being just sort of doing consulting to doing public speaking and coaching of CEOs, and led to doing my podcast. So it's the company is a little bit different, but since 2000.
Wow. So I'm curious, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your business life, and how did you overcome it?
Biggest mistake. Gosh, I mean, it's. I'm sure they've made tons of mistakes, right? So, I probably a couple really stick out. I mean, one was early in my career, jumping too quickly from one company to a next without maybe doing all my appropriate due diligence, which came back to bite me. Mm-hmm. That was one. But as entrepreneurs, I mean, and as I said, I had my company for 16 years. I've made countless mistakes about investing money in the wrong place. Not really, not getting return from the investments I made in certain technologies or certain programs or certain business initiatives. But they were all learning experiences. So I mean, that's how do you recover? It's you learn about. Take the lessons away from it and try to apply it and be smarter the next time going forward. So, I mean, for me, a lot of mistakes I make probably are from
I don't know, maybe not, I don't want to say being too aggressive, but being aggressive, going out and trying new things. And so, yeah, there's bound to be mistakes along the way, and there have been. I'm sure there'll be more in the future.
But what was the biggest one, Andy?
Well, I mean, there's nothing that's really been huge. I mean, that's I mean, I said it's when I went to that company too quickly, it cost me 6 months of my time, in my career that I probably could have used to benefit somewhere else at another company. But I don't look back at it and regret. And I think that to me that's really one of the key things in terms of perspective and a mindset for success is that I take the lessons from the mistakes, but I don't regret having made them. And that's partially why I guess it's made it harder for me to recall them, because I don't dwell on the past. I'll learn the lesson, I'll take that lesson, I'll try to do my best to avoid that again going forward, but then it's gone. It doesn't weigh me down. And I think that comes from being in sales. I mean, I think people that really struggle in sales over the long term are the ones that are always operating in fear that they might do something that they did before, and you just can't operate that way.
Great stuff. And what about breakthroughs? I mean, what if you had to pick one thing that's been the biggest breakthrough in your business over the past 12 months that you sort of absolutely recommend that anyone listening to this must do if they want to get the same results? What would you say that is?
Well, the thing for me has been the podcast. So we started that off as a 3-day-a-week podcast back in October of 2015, last year, not quite a year ago, and we're now doing 6 days a week. So part of the reason we continue to add episodes is the audience is growing quickly. There's a demand for the high quality content we were putting out. And so we've sort of expanded, and now we have a wait list about 4 or 5 months long of people who want to be on the show. Awesome. So yeah, it has a ripple effect through the rest of the things we're doing. It continues to build my brand about what I'm doing, and get more people inquiring about how I can help them.
And again, not that difficult to do, is it? A podcast once you've got the infrastructure. It's from a technical perspective. I mean, Andy, it's not daunting by any means, is it, Andy?
No. And so when you do 6 days a week, there's a lot of time involved. So I do have virtual team members that I can outsource a lot of the post-production to. That saves me a lot of time, so I can stay focused on what I need to. But the great thing is that there's so many people now podcasting, and it continues to be a vibrant, growing business. And I think that for people listening, if you run a company, even if you're not an author, I think these days it's one of the easiest way to create content for your content marketing. That virtually, if you have a blog, I think for almost any company it'd be easier just to do a podcast.
Yeah.
And they should really consider making that transition. There's lots of resources, and people can contact me about that. But there's a lot of resources available to help people sort of get their feet wet with that.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes. I endorse that. Any business leader listening to this now should be seriously considering doing podcasts if they want to grow their business, because it's a great way, and as you said, it's a great way of generating content as well that you can reuse.
Well, it's easier than. Many people are daunted by the prospect of sitting with a blank page and writing a blog. What am I going to blog about? Putting 3 questions on a piece of paper and bringing a guest on and having a conversation. People do that naturally. And then you can take the transcript. And the transcript could become multiple blogs.
Yeah.
And then you could also take your audio file and put it up on your YouTube channel. I mean, there's multiple ways to reuse the content that you can't do, let's say, with a blog.
Yeah.
And Andy, I mean, apart from the podcast, what else do you do to grow your business?
Well, I speak. I do a fair amount of speaking. It sort of comes and goes based on other things I'm working on. But I'll be coming to the UK in November to speak at a conference in London.
Oh, wow.
Called the Customer Growth Summit. It's put on by one of your compatriots, a gentleman named Jermaine Edwards. And middle of November 15, 16. So urge people to look that up, customergrowthsummit.com. And speaking, podcasts. I do podcasts like this. Other people hear me on other shows. But really, the driver for me is really my podcast at this point.
Awesome.
And in terms of people wanting to reach out to you, actually, before I come to that, I would really be interested in who have been the biggest influences for you in your business life, Andy?
Well, I mean, it sort of goes back to early sales managers. Sort of had the biggest impact. People that were sort of mentors for me at critical stages of my career. That taught me different lessons. One about really first sales manager really was about keeping it simple and dealing from a point of integrity and character, and that was a huge lesson to learn. First job out of school, first professional selling job. And another manager a little bit later, about 10 years after that, who has turned into a lifelong friend who taught me the value of just being really analytical about selling. That was not as a process, but it's not so process driven. There's people on the other end. You always have to be mindful of the person on the other end. We can bring all the technology we want to bear on sales and marketing and automating aspects of it, but at the end of the day, it's still a person selling to a person. And how do you help them move from point A, where they're interested, to point B, where they want to give you an order? And he was really influential in helping me focus on the fact that it is a person and what can you do, what are the things that help that person move forward. And a lot of that's incorporated in the things I write about. So those two gentlemen, perhaps the biggest influences.
Yeah, and any books or anything that you've read or watched and it's been a big influence as you've embarked on this career, Andy?
Well, I always remember the first sales book I read, which was a book by a gentleman named Tom Hopkins called Mastering the Art of Selling. And it's still available, and I had Tom as a guest on my show early this year. And yeah, it's still a relevant book. I mean, I think just as a compendium, if you will, of various sales processes, techniques, behaviors, mindset, so on and so forth, all in one. I think it's very, very valuable. There's other books like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Certainly, it's still a classic after, 80 years after it was written.
Amazing.
Still very relevant. So, I mean, I sort of defer a lot to the classics as the ones that I read at certain stages of my life that were the right book at the right time.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Andy, where can our listeners go to find out more about what you do?
Well, they can come to my website at andypaul.com and urge them to check out the tab there, click on podcast. I got a blog tab. You can read my blog. I post the podcast 6 days a week. You can find that on iTunes and Stitcher and most of the other major podcast directories. But to connect with me, just send me an email at andy@zerotimeselling.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. Urge people do, and that's, again, the standard LinkedIn preface, but you can search for me under Zero Time Selling, all one word. And follow me on Twitter. We've got a very active Twitter following, a large growing Twitter following, and again, that's at Zero Time Selling.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Andy. And thank you so much for what you've shared with us today. I think one of the big takeaways for anybody, I don't know whether it's a big one, certainly one you've reminded me about, that selling is not telling, and it is all about listening. And you also highlighted the importance of behaviour of individuals if they want to be successful. There's certainly essential behaviours. Also encourage the fact that you believe, and I agree with you as well, that top sales professionals are made rather than born. There is a myth about that, as you said at the very beginning.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yeah, and that little tip you gave there about the Google alerts, and rather than just reaching out to clients just for a catch up, but having a reason and giving value when you reach out to a client on your prospect list, so to speak. So simple to do as well, Andy. And as anybody listening to that, you can implement that in the next 10 minutes, literally, and to be doing that, to give him, so you're ensuring that you're giving value to your prospects every time you reach out to them. Absolutely.
Well, I think for people that read my books, follow what I write about or what I talk about, my book Zero Time Selling or Amp Up Your Sales, you really nailed it. It's about, what are the things you need to do at the baseline to make everything else you do more effective. And I find that a lot of the readers that I get sort of the most raves from, if you will, about my books are oftentimes people who've been in sales for a while. And it's like, this is like a reminder to them that, oh my gosh, maybe I've sort of fallen out of the habit of doing some of these things. And if I just go back, because I know I can do them, it's going to make a big difference. And it does.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, brilliant. And again, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, great stuff. This is Terry Edwards. Drew, I want to say thank you as well. Sorry, mate. Nearly forgot. But yeah, this is Terry Edwards, Renegade Recruiter. Drew, thank you very much indeed. Andy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Take care. If you enjoyed this, by the way, tell all your friends and share the podcast. If you didn't enjoy it, well, I'll keep that to yourself. But seriously, this is Terry Edwards. Take care, take action, and be relentless.